How much time do you spend worrying about whether you've got the exact right fly on or if you're fishing that piece of water the correct way? And have you ever had an old timer come up to you and say something like, man, all you need is this fly and a little bit of split shot and you'll spend all day ripping lips? I know you've seen how-to articles, experts on Instagram, and maybe you've even cracked open a book or two to learn about fly fishing. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone's got a theory on how it should be done, and you're left to sift through all of that without much help at all to identify what's actually going to make a difference for you. So today on Untangled, I'm going to throw a bit more advice your way, but it's really advice on handling advice. How to sift through all the noise out there and focus on the things that will actually improve your time and experience on the water. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant, coming at you today, fully caffeinated, all hopped up on my Diet Coke, and I recently did have a big plate of wings, so today's show is going to be even more jaw-droppingly, outstandingly amazing than usual. I'm just excited to be here today, folks, as always. Let's start with a little story to get into today's discussion. A few years ago, Alex, my partner in crime here at VFC, he's co-founder, really runs a lot of the day-to-day operations as well. And his brother, Berkeley, who heads up most of our product design here at VFC, the three of us, we were out fishing this little creek not too far from where I live. And it was almost this exact time of year, actually. So the water was a little bit high. It was running fast, but it was clear. You could definitely fish it. And the creek we were on, it's up kind of in the high country. It's getting up there. It's kind of wide, especially down lower where we were at. But it is full of cutthroat and Rocky Mountain whitefish, so they're not super picky in there. It can be some really nice, fast fishing if you get up there and figure out where the fish are. So we get to this one spot, and there's this big shelf, and the river just dumps right off of this shelf into right off of these riffles into this shelf, and there's just this gorgeous seam right where all of this water is meeting each other, and it's just a kind of spot that's screaming that it holds a ton of fish. But in addition to that beautiful, beautiful water feature there's also a lot of calm pockets that were really tight to the bank. They were tucked underneath the willows, maybe behind some of the logs and whatnot, but a lot of little pockets that just looked real inviting as well, where the water was slow and calm enough that I thought, hey, there might be some fish hanging out in these pockets as well. So we got all set up to fish, and Alex went straight for that seam. I think Berkeley came with me. Alex goes straight for that shelf and that seam, though. He sets up a nymph rig, and he starts fishing it. And he catches a few pretty quickly. He starts doing pretty well for himself, and I think they were mostly whitefish, a couple trout in there. But I did things a little bit differently. I put on a stimulator, and I started working those pockets that were really tight to the bank. And I missed one strike right off the bat, moved up a little bit, and then I hooked and landed a pretty decent cutthroat. It was like 14 inches maybe, but it was all bright colored up, looked all sorts of pretty, like it was dressed up because it knew it was going to go on Instagram and be famous. It got ready for the day. And so the time we spent in that section of river played out that way. Alex fished that seam off of that shelf. Berkeley and I fished those little pockets on the banks, and we all caught fish. So here's the question for you, and I want you to chew on this for a little bit. Did Alex fish that river the right way, or did I fish it the right way? You think about that for a minute. Well, I tell you another quick story. Last fall, Alex and I, we were out on our favorite river. We spent a lot of time fishing there to the point where, we almost feel like we fish it too much sometimes, but it's just so much stinking fun. And there's this little midge hatch going on right when we pulled up. the fish were up and they were eating off of the surface, but they weren't eating very consistently. So there wasn't a lot of consistent rhythmic risers that I could set up and cast to, catch it, and then move on to the next one. They were just kind of rising everywhere without much rhyme or reason. So even though there were fish rising, Alex rigged up a nymph setup. Obviously, he put some midges on it because the fish are clearly eating midges. That's what's hatching. They're up and they're looking up. But he went up a little bit higher in this run that we started out in. He was looking for those seams, some of the narrow slots where the fish like to hang out, where they're probably, sitting lower in the water column, but looking up, more willing to move because obviously there's some midge activity going on. And I set up shop closer down to where the run tailed out into a big pool. And that's where a lot of the risers were. So I just tied on a little Matt's midge dry fly and I started casting to the risers. Even though they weren't rhythmic, even though they weren't consistent, I still just wanted to do that. And I think Alex caught like 5 or 6 pretty quickly, including one that was a pretty nice brown, which is funny because I haven't caught a nice brown out of this river in a long time. I catch some decent rainbows and cutthroat out of there, but Alex keeps finding the big browns, and it's starting to get under my skin a little bit. I'm wondering what sort of black magic he's doing because I want a nice brown trout. It's not fair he gets all of them. But anyways, he catches those fish, that nice brown, and I actually hooked into and landed a brown trout myself, but it was 5 inches on my little dry fly rig. But I was having a blast with it because I had to throw the cast kind of far. There were a lot of seams I had to mend and reach cast over. It wasn't easy, straightforward dry fly fishing. There was a lot of technical casting and mending and just making sure that you're getting it right. And I'm not sitting here like, oh, I was amazing. Look at me in my Rolls Royce as I pull up to the river and my double-breasted smoking jacket. No, of course it's not that, right? It's just, it was tougher, and I liked the challenge of trying to get the drift right. And the eat, for me, just getting a fish to eat was the reward. Okay? So, same question. Did Alex fish that correctly, or did I fish it correctly? Which one of us was right? And for those listening, I'm doing air quotes around the word right. Now, I hope the answer to this question is obvious. I really do, because it should be, but I feel like it's not as obvious as maybe it is to me. And it's based on a lot of the questions that I hear from beginners, whether they're sent into the podcast or even from folks who've been fly fishing for a while. Because we'll get a lot of questions, again, here into the podcast, or folks will post in our school group and they'll describe a situation where they're trying to figure out the water, they're running into a challenge, they can't catch fish, and they usually end their question with something to the effect of, what's the right way to do this? What should I be doing? And I understand why they're asking that question. They want to figure things out. They want to catch fish. But honestly, I think they're asking the wrong question at that point. Or at the very least, they're framing it incorrectly. Okay. And this matters because if there's one thing that I can confidently tell you that, hey, I know this about fly fishing. I will hang my hat on this being one of the few universal truths in fly fishing. Okay. It's that your mindset and your mental approach to this sport matters just as much, maybe even a tiny bit more than your actual ability to cast, to read water, to match the hatch, any of that technical stuff. You have to be in the right headspace to be a successful angler, in my experience, in my time out on the water. So, to the folks who are asking that question, who are wondering, what am I doing wrong? What should I be doing? How should I fish this? You're thinking, all right, that's me. I've asked that question before. Well, right, Durant says I'm wrong. Well, what's wrong about it? Well, it's not necessarily that it's wrong. Okay, it's not, the question's not wrong. It's the mindset, the way that question is framed, okay, makes it seem like there's a silver bullet, single perfect solution that if you do X, Y will happen. Okay. That's not always the case in fly fishing, because there is no perfect way to approach a piece of water. And I know some folks are going to disagree with me on this, but let me explain myself for a sec. There are definitely things that you're going to do on the water that will make it harder for you to catch fish, or even impossible to catch fish in some instances. Getting too close to the fish and spooking them. Slapping the water with your fly line when they are in the middle of eating off the top. You're going to spook them. You're going to put them down. If the fish are actively eating off the top, they're going nuts on a big dry fly hatch, and you just start ripping a streamer through the top 3 inches of the water column. That's got a very high chance of putting those fish down. And until you move on or rest the pool for a bit, there's a very high chance you're not going to catch more fish from there. Okay. But you have to remember that aside from the obvious big mistakes that are going to spook the fish, that are going to put them down, there's still not this one absolutely perfect silver bullet method that's going to guarantee a fish every time you run into that exact situation, because no 2 days on the river are the same. No two, even on the same river, right? You can go fish through the one run, let it rest, come back an hour later. It's not going to be exactly the same. It's going to be similar, but it's not always exactly the same. And I really do think that's the biggest lie that gets perpetuated in a lot of fly fishing media, is that there's this ironclad right and wrong way to do things. And you do see a lot of that of, well, this is how to do it. This is what to do. No, this is what we've done. This is what has worked for us. And these are principles. These are foundational skills that you can take and tweak and modify and apply to however works best for you, your waters, and your unique fishing situations. Because yes, good drifts, good fly selection, fishing the right times of the day and the year, all those little things, reading water, that's all universal. Whether you're out here in the Rockies like me, or you're back east, or you're in the driftless, doesn't matter. Okay, that's all universal. But the way that I fish, the way I rig up my dry dropper rig for the creek right out back of my house is probably pretty different than the way someone's going to rig up their dry dropper rig out in the driftless. Okay, probably going to be different flies, different length, different size flies, different sizes of tippet. There's going to be a lot of similarities, but it's not this ironclad, do this, and you're going to get this sort of result. Okay, it really is up to you how you enjoy and experience fly fishing. And all this advice, everything that I say, everything you read and listen to anywhere else, which hopefully you're not listening anywhere else, because this is the #1 podcast in fly fishing. No, it's not the #1 podcast in fly fishing yet. But kidding aside, wherever you're listening to and getting advice from, it shouldn't be taken as, well, this is the only way to do things. Okay, it's all skills. It's all foundational skill development that you take, tweak, and apply to your own situations. And that's the mark of real growth as an angler, I think, is being able to take all of this info, analyze it, synthesize it, and then sit down on the river and think, okay, well, I'm going to do this that I heard from Untangled, and I'm going to do this that I heard from Trout Bit, and I'm going to do this that I heard from Orvis, or wherever. Melding all the advice, that's really the mark of someone who's thinking this through, who's got that right mindset that I talked about earlier, who's willing to just say, okay, there is no right and wrong way to do this, because your job at the end of the day is to put flies in front of fish and make them look real. Long-time listeners of the podcast knew that one was coming. I was almost as sure as a wing joke or a Diet Coke reference. And we got all three today. So if you're playing along in bingo at home, Untangled bingo, there you go. But how you choose to put flies in front of fish, how you choose to make them look real, it's completely up to you. Now, are there some ways to pull that off that are going to be more effective than others? Absolutely. 100%. In both of the stories that I shared, was dry fly fishing the most effective way to fish the water that we came to and the situations we came to? Probably not, if the goal was catching as many fish as possible. But I really enjoy dry fly fishing. I enjoy the different challenges that you get from it, and I enjoy the visual aspect of it. And that's not to knock on any other kind of fishing, obviously. Nymphing is plenty challenging in its own right. Streamer fishing has its own challenges. I just gravitate towards dry fly fishing. It's just, it scratches that itch for me. Okay. But since that's how I love to fish, I will do it any chance I get. And I was more than content. I was happy with what I caught on dry flies. And I had a great time with it. And here's the thing. I guarantee you Alex was just as satisfied and happy with what he was catching, doing it the way that he was doing it. Okay. Now, if your goal was to look for the big one or to try and get as many fish in the net as possible, that's what you wanted to do that day, then Alex's approach 100% is the more productive option. But neither of us was right or wrong on either situation that we were in. Neither of us was right or wrong. You could have used Tenkara rod, honestly, and done really well in both situations, I bet. For those who don't know, Tenkara is this style of fishing, where you've got a long rod, like 13, 14 feet, even longer in some instances, and no reel, just a level piece of line, and then you kind of just high stick and drift and swing your flies through a lot of pockets. It's not my favorite way to fish. I've done it. I did it a lot when it really kind of exploded out onto the fly fishing scene, and it's just not my favorite way to do it. But it's there's a lot of folks who love Tenkara, and they probably would have cleaned up, especially during that mid hatch. I think they would have caught way more than I did on the dry fly, and they probably would have caught the big ones instead of the little 5-inchers that were just happy to get a midge in their face. And then Euro nymphing probably would have been the best option in each situation to catch a whole bunch of fish. There's a reason that competitive anglers almost always default to tight line nymphing because it's so effective and you catch so many fish. You've got a higher percentage of catching big fish because your flies are getting right in front of them. The strike detection is great. You can really just feel so much more with that tight line nymphing setup. It's a very effective way to just put a bunch of fish in the net. But Alex and I, it's not our favorite way to fish. Again, it's one of those things where I've done it. I enjoy it a lot more than I enjoy Tenkara. And I'll still bust it out every now and then, but it's not our favorite way to fish. So it's not the method that we default to. Okay, but it probably, if we're looking just purely on fish catching abilities in those two situations I described, probably going to be the most effective from that point of view. Okay. But I made this the main part of today's show because I really think it's critical that people understand this. This is my soapbox. This is my thing I'm going to stand on for a while. Because if you're new to the sport, you've been doing it for a while, maybe you just don't get out as much as you'd like, and you find yourself on the water and you're second guessing your choices. You're wondering, well, should I try this? Or what about this? Am I standing in the right spot? Or the fish even still here? That guy up there caught a fish. What am I doing wrong? I know exactly how that feels. I know what you're going through because that was me not too long ago. Okay, I keep saying that. I'm getting old. It was that long ago. I gotta let go of the youth at this point. But anyway, I've been there. I've been there on those days where I spent more time on my fly box, putting rigs together, tweaking things, staring at the water than I did fishing because I kept changing my mind. I kept second guessing everything. I was fishing very timidly. I wasn't fishing with confidence. And big shocker, those are the days when I got skunked. And not just like skunked, didn't catch anything. Like the fish actively swam away from me because I was so obviously flustered that not even trout could stand to be around me at that time, which is another feeling I bet we've all had. And I've heard this phrase paralysis by analysis lately. I really, really like that for describing, what I went through, what I see a lot of other anglers going through, which is you do have a lot of choices on how to approach any given piece of water. There's a lot of different ways you can tackle it. You've got all this advice. You've got this bearded guy on a podcast telling you what to do. There's this book that you read years ago that you still remember. There's magazine articles. Everybody's telling you this is how to do it. So how do you sort through all of that? And how do you actually make decisions that are going to benefit you on the water, that are actually going to improve your time? And really, it just comes back to putting flies in front of fish and making them look real. That needs to be the guiding principle is I'm going to put this fly in front of a fish. I'm going to make it look real. And I'm going to do it in a way that I enjoy doing. Maybe we should add that as the addendum to this. Your job is to put flies in front of fish, make them look real, and have fun doing it. If you have way more fun fishing a dry fly, do it. If you got way more fun fishing nymph rig, do it. If you don't care and you just want to catch fish, do whatever is going to give you the highest chance of success that day. Okay. I think we're going to get to this. I had a lot prepared to talk about. And I think I'm actually going to jump into this. This whole put flies in front of fish, make them look real. It's not a new thought process. It's been around for a long time. And in his book, I've actually got it right here. I just got my very first copy of it, holding it up for those who are watching the video podcast. It's Matching the Hatch by Ernest Schweibert. And he wrote this back in 1955. And he wrote in there that, quote, "The trout is shy. To overcome his sophistication, we must study his habits carefully. His biggest advantage is selectivity, and we can counteract it only by knowing the insects that make up his diet. This is the reason for the study of stream entomology by the angler, and it is often the weak link in his skill. All of his other skills are aimed at getting the fly over a fish that is not yet aware of his presence. They are of little value if that carefully presented fly is not the one that the trout wants." So, all the way back in 1955, with much more flowery language than I can use, they were getting it even back then. Okay. So that's your North Star when you step out on the water. That is what's guiding you in everything is put those flies in front of fish and make them look real. So again, let's wrap this up. Let's put a little bow on this. How do you actually do that? How do you decide what you're going to do? How do you sort through all this advice that you're getting and execute out on the water? Well, my advice on taking advice is pretty simple. Whatever method you decide to do on a given day, whatever you're up to, whatever is scratching the itch for you that day, fish that as best as you can before you switch to another style, another tactic. Okay, if you show up to the river, you decide that a nymph rig is going to give you the best chance, give that nymph rig everything you've got. Make sure you're adjusting the depth, moving your indicator up and down, making sure you're dialed into that strike zone. Use lighter flies or heavier flies if you have to. Even put split shot on if you've got to. Make sure you're working every lane, really picking the water apart. Cast up further to get your flies more time dropping into the strike zone. Every little thing you can do to give yourself an advantage. Really work it. Really just go through this with as much thoroughness as you possibly can. And then that's when you can switch. If you don't catch fish right off the bat, don't let that doubt creep in and ruin the day. And I know that's much easier said than done, but seriously, give it time. Don't show up to the river with your regular rig, fish through it for 10 minutes, not catch anything, and then just default to throwing the whole fly box at the river, because that's another common thing I see. And I did that all the friggin' time. I'd show up, I'd fish the way I want to for 15, 20 minutes. It wouldn't work. And I'd just start going through the whole fly box without any rhyme or reason to what I was doing. I wasn't having any sort of consistency, of method to my madness at all. I would just kind of spray and pray for lack of a better phrase. Okay. Some days it really is a grind out there on the water. It's not as easy as it looks on YouTube sometimes. It would be nice if it all was, but it's not. Okay. And again, that biggest lie in fly fishing, hands down, is that there's one right way to do things. And that if you don't do things the way that you're told, you're not going to catch fish. Okay, remember, I'm not telling you how to catch fish. I'm not telling you go do X, Y, and Z. I'm saying here's how to handle all this advice that you're getting. Because as those two stories showed earlier that I shared, there's a lot of different ways to catch the same fish from the same piece of water. So hopefully that's helpful. And then the other little bit of advice that I would give you is also just pick up one of our field guides. because I really think all the information that's in there helps take the pressure off of the day. So you can just focus on the fishing and you're not worrying about hatch timings and rigs. All that information's in there. It's this physical book, spiral bound, completely waterproof. It fits right in your pack. Really handy to have, and they're completely free. We've got all that in there because we want you to be able to have that relaxing, no pressure day out on the water. So we made them as free as possible. Well, yeah, as free as possible, which is free. You just have to pay shipping to get them to your house. There's a link to grab one of those down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. But hopefully that helps. Hopefully that gives you some clarity and some guidance on those days when you feel really overwhelmed out on the water. And if you got anything else to add to this discussion, please don't hesitate. Drop some comments. Jump into our school group. Let me know what you thought of this episode there as well. But we are going to move on to the Q&A portion of this week's episode. And every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, there's a link to do that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And we do need to start today's Q&A portion off with a little bit of a public service announcement. The way that our podcast question form works is when you send a question in to us, the only data that I see on my end is your name, where you're from, how often you fish, how often you listen to Untangled, and then your question. We don't get email addresses. We don't get any other kind of information. So if you send a question into the podcast that's more of like a customer service type question, or it's more specific to, hey, I'm going on a trip. What do you recommend? Stuff that you don't want answered on the podcast. There's literally no way to get back to you because we don't have the email address. So make sure that you're just using the customer service link on our website for those customer service style questions and not the podcast question link. We love hearing from you guys. We want to help you out as much as possible, but when they get sent to the wrong place, we can't answer the questions. And so that's a problem we're trying to solve. But definitely just make sure you're dropping those customer service type questions in the customer service line. So with that, let's jump into the questions. Sam from Maine has our first question, writes in and says, "Hi, Spencer and Alex. I live in coastal Maine where the winters are long and cold and ice covers most bodies of water from November through March. My local river is one of the few in the state that remains open to fly fishing year-round. Most others are closed from October 1st to March 31st to give the native fish a chance to survive. The state's Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife heavily stocks my local river a few times a year with brookies and browns from April to November. I've been fly fishing my river since I was 13 years old. I'm in my mid-40s now. And when the temperatures are above freezing, I fish the river as often as I can, from 1 to 3 times per week. During the winter, I prefer to Euro nymph and match the hatch to the insects I find clinging to rocks. This past winter was a doozy and I got skunked every time I fished from early November until last week on April 30th when I hooked into a freshly stocked 10-inch brookie. One difference from past years is that I'd been seeing a mink on the riverbank almost every time I was out fishing. I frequently found blood and fish scales in the snow. Ever since I was a kid, I had never seen mink on my section of the river, just the usual river otters, eagles, snapping turtles, and osprey, none of which stick around for winter. My question is this: could the presence of mink in the river have contributed to my 5-month losing streak? Can mink wipe out fish population in areas that previously have been productive year-round fishing spots? Or should I chalk this up to a winter of bad luck and more likely improper fly selection and presentation? Sam, this is an awesome question. Thank you a ton for sending this one in. Short answer, mink do eat trout and they're very effective predators. So it is probable that they're going to have an impact on trout populations, especially if there's a lot of mink in one area, and then there aren't any other predators to help keep the mink population in check. Now, the long answer to this, I got to dig into a scientific paper about mink eating trout, and can I just say that I love the fact that that paper exists? Friggin' love American wildlife science sometimes, man. It's so awesome. So this particular paper, it was by a master's student out of South Dakota who studied mink predation on brown trout in small streams in the Black Hills region of South Dakota. And I'll link the study if you want to read it for yourself. It'll be down in the show notes. But the big takeaway from this study is that mink predation in those streams was statistically significant. The streams in the study, mink predation on brown trout was statistically significant. They did see it happening. However, their willingness to eat brown trout depended a lot more on whether mink were actively trapped and hunted and whether there was good fish habitat. Those are the two big factors that influenced it. Areas with good habitat, they had a lot less mink movement, so the predation was localized to a smaller area, probably because the better fish habitat made hunting for their meals easier. Okay, the fish were congregated around the better habitat. They didn't have to venture as far, so their predation was limited to that one area. The other big key from the study was that a lot of mink predation occurred during late spring and early summer when the mink were mating and then giving birth to the young and then kicking the young out to venture into the world on their own. So they didn't see a lot of high predation during the winter mink on brown trout. Now, we obviously need to pair that information with the caveat that South Dakota obviously isn't Maine, and the stocking schedule for that river of yours in Maine is going to play a role here as well. Because you also said that the river gets heavily stocked from April through November, and in my experience, the rivers that get stocked that heavily, they usually receive it for two reasons. They're either being managed as a put and take fishery where you expect a significant amount of harvest, or the river can't support big trout populations year round, so they stock it heavily when it does have the right conditions for supporting trout, and then they do hope that some might winter over and provide some nice wild fish fishing opportunities in the next year, or it might be a combination of the two. But usually, though, when you see a lot of stocking, that means there's a pretty high amount of harvest or some kind of fish mortality in general, and the river can't support that harvest or that fish mortality through natural trout reproduction, has to be supplemented by stocking in some way. So based on your question, when I was looking through it, you said that you had some success there in other winters, correct? If that's the case, then it sounds like trout can survive in the winter there, and the high stocking rate is to help offset how much harvest that river sees. So in that case, with you seeing a lot of mink and even the torn up fish on the snow, that does make me think that mink predation on the brown trout was definitely a factor. I don't know that I would go so far as to say the mink wiped out the entire population, but it's very possible that the mink predation caused the fish to move and go to different areas of the river where the mink weren't present, because that could happen. The other thing is, I did hear rumblings about how nuts the winter was out on the East Coast this year. So maybe that played a role as well. Maybe it just got too cold for the fish to survive in the river. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know a whole ton about what overwinter survival looks like for trout. That might be something to it as well. But the study I mentioned and drew all this information from, it did show that in one stretch of river, 32% of brown trout mortality was due to mink predation. And in places with mink predation that high, the trout were much more likely to expand their home range and move around the river and find a new place to live away from the mink. And one nugget that was really interesting from that study is that brown trout, at least in the Black Hills, they would generally stay within the same 125 to 200 meters of river throughout the study time frame. So they had relatively small home ranges, but they would venture out of that if the mink predation got pretty high. It was really interesting stuff. So bottom line here, I do think the mink had an impact. I think the fish moved, and then maybe they just didn't winter over as well with the winter that y'all had. There's a lot that can go into this, but I will bet the mink made a difference just based on your description of it. And then again, that study is linked down in the show notes if you want to take a look through it for yourself. But fantastic question. Thanks a bunch for sending it in. Corey from Missouri has our next question, writes in and says, What kind of knots are most fly anglers tying? I hear Spencer talk a lot about his loop knots for dry droppers and such, but how are we attaching the tippet to the hook? I see so much controversy. Davy knot, fisherman, clinch. Any advice would be great. Thanks. Corey, this is a good question. I'm going to make some waves here, so I'm fully prepared for the mean comments. So everybody out there who's been waiting to comment on something I said today, here's your chance. The knot you use in fly fishing does not matter. Let me say that again. The knot you use in fly fishing does not matter. Whether you use the uni or the clinch or the Davy or whatever it is, the non-slip monoloop, if that's your go-to, it does not matter at all. Okay? 99% of the time, I use the clinch knot. It's what I was taught. It's what I know how to do very well. I could do it blindfolded in the snow with my hands covered in bacon grease because I've done it so many times. I've had the great opportunity to fish since I was like 6 years old. So that's just what I've always been doing. And rarely have I had the clinch fail on me. Now, last week, I was out fishing. I was on my way down to Utah to meet up with Alex to get some work done. And I hooked one of the biggest cutthroat that I'd ever seen when I stopped to fish on this little drive. And this cutthroat came up. It sipped my royal flush. I had it on for like 5 seconds, and then the hook popped out and flew back and smacked me in the face. And I was really sad. So I looked down at the end of the tippet, and it was all curled up like a pig's tail, which is the telltale sign that the knot pulled free. It didn't break, it just pulled free, which means I didn't tie the knot correctly. So I probably just didn't wrap the tag end around itself enough times, or I didn't seat the knot properly, and it just pulled free. And when I have the clinch knot fail on me, 99% of the time, it's because the knot's pulled free and I messed up. I just didn't tie it as well as I should have. Okay. So what our advice here at VFC is to pick a knot, get great at it, and use that one because it really doesn't matter. All the knots are going to secure your flies to the hook. Some of them, we could really dig into it and talk, well, does this one cause more drag or does this one not? The only time that I will stray from the clinch is when I'm fishing streamers or nymphs in a lake. I will tie that non-slip monoloop because I want those flies to have more movement than the clinch knot gives them. So I will go ahead and use that non-slip monoloop to allow for some more natural lifelike movement. Other than that, I'm using the clinch. That is my go-to. I know it. I understand it. I tie it well. I tie it confidently. I know folks are going to get all up in arms about, well, this knot's the best, or the clinch never works for me. Or, okay, that's fine. I'm not telling you that you're wrong. Yeah, I'm just telling you, pick a knot that works for you and then just tie that one. Because it really doesn't matter at the end of the day which one you use, so long as you can tie the knot well. So a good question, Corey. Appreciate you sending it in. Chuck from Wyoming has our next question, writes in and says, hi, my wife and I are brand new to fly fishing, and we're looking at getting one of your fly collections. My question is, if I were to buy only one collection for us to share, which one should I go with? We will mainly be fishing in Wyoming, but may travel to Colorado to check it out. Thanks for your help. Chuck, this is a great question. Remember earlier when I shared that quote from this book, Matching the Hatch? This book was written in 1955, and it's got a bunch of mayfly, caddis, and stonefly hatches for East Coast and Rocky Mountain anglers. That's its big focus. And what I've noticed as I've gone through it, there's some pretty significant differences in color and hatch timings between the flies I use here and the flies my buddies use back east. But the flies that we use to imitate a lot of these insects end up being really stinking similar at the end of the day. There's so much similarity between them. You're always going to see some sort of regional flair on patterns. They're going to be a unique take on how they're tied just based on what you see out in your local waters. But the flies are incredibly similar all across the country. And that's because, for the most part, as this book details, fish are eating the same things here in Wyoming that they're eating in Pennsylvania. Caddis, mayflies, midges, stoneflies. That's the bulk of their diet. That makes up most of what they eat. So I bring all this up just to tell you that whatever fly collection you snag from us, they are designed to match the insects and trout streams anywhere, not just out here in the West where we're based. We've had folks send us pictures of fish they've caught on our flies from the east, from the Midwest, from the Southeast, from even the Southwest, I believe, even out in Slovenia. Alex caught fish on our flies there when he was there a couple of years ago. So you don't need a different box. Just if I'm going to Colorado, I need this box. If I'm going to Wyoming, I need this box, because the bugs you use in Wyoming, they'll work down in Colorado just fine. You just might need smaller sizes of them because Colorado fish love tiny flies. But that's really the biggest difference, right? Is the size. Pattern's really going to stay the same. If you're getting a fly collection to share, I would just recommend getting the Ultimate Collection because it's got the most flies. And since we know losing flies is a real thing that happens a lot, having a large number of flies on hand can be pretty helpful. And I'll throw a link down to the Ultimate Collection for you in the show notes. And that wraps up the Q&A portion of this week's show, but it's now time to end with the Live Real Life moment. And every week we wrap the show up by sharing a story and a picture from someone out in the audience who is living real life. We love to hear about all the great adventures y'all are up to. So please, if you've got a Live Real Life moment that you'd like to share with us, send those on in. There's a link to do that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment is from Eric. Writes in and says, I live in Florida, which does not have any native trout within hours of where I live. To work on my skills as a fly angler, I went to a pond walking distance from my apartment. I was struggling to catch anything until I saw fish chasing after what looked like fry. I thought the fry were of a similar size and shape to a black prince nymph fly that I had. I tried it out and started pulling in bluegill like you wouldn't believe. I brought friends to the pond who try to use spinning reels, but the fish in that pond don't seem interested in even 16th ounce jigs. When we go, my friends will catch one fish in the time it takes me to get 5 or more. The bluegill in the picture is one of the biggest that I've caught from that pond on my 4-weight. Eric, I love it. I have not gotten into some good bluegill fishing in a while, so that looks like a blast. I might need to know where this pond is so I can come down there and fish it. No, keep it to yourself, man. But thank you for sharing the story. I love it. And hopefully you got to have some bluegill fish tacos. Those are tasty if you like eating fish. It's a good way to prepare some bluegill, especially ones that are big enough to eat, like that one that you caught. So again, tip of the hat to you. Thanks for sharing that. And thank you to everybody who's been here to listen to the show all the way through. That does a ton to help us out. If you want to help us out even more, tell everybody you know about Untangled. Make sure you're spreading the good word of VFC as far as you can. That helps us reach more folks. That helps us help more people live real life, which is our goal here at Untangled as well and at VFC. But again, just thank you guys for being here. And until next time, get out on the water, enjoy yourselves, and live real life.